college lecture hall, I feel inclined to begin, as did all my professors, by saying that if you're not here for Get Off the Freelance Roller Coaster, if you are here for Get Off the Freelance Roller Coaster, you're in the right place. If not, please check your class schedules and see the registrar, please. Here's the guy that you all really came to see, I think. As for me, my name's Yitzchok Willroth, but if it's easier for you, feel free to call me just Yitz. I've found over the years that that does tend to keep me drier. So if there's any questions, please err on the side of safety. If you weren't already aware, those of you who perhaps don't know me, you can pretty much find me in all of the obvious places on the internet as Code Rabbi. This is what I do for a living. That basically means that I care about code, I help companies care for their coders, and I help coders care for their companies. Most importantly, though, that means that I have the absolute best boss in the world. Me. It also means that I have absolutely the worst boss in the world. Also me. Raise the hands. How many of you currently freelance? A couple of brave souls. Okay. How many of you considered freelancing at one point or another, but haven't yet taken the plunge because it's big and scary? Yeah, okay, all right. Freelancing can be at once both liberating and terrifying. The freedom and satisfaction resulting from growing your own business is without comparison. The stress and anxiety resulting from growing your own business can also be enough for many, as it was here, to dismiss it as a viable option. As rewarding as life can be for successful freelancers, freelancing is very often associated with inconsistency and insecurity. For me, the challenge of growing a freelance business was something that I expected, and I was relatively prepared for it, I think, at least emotionally. I knew that to build up a clientele, it would take time, and things weren't going to happen overnight, and that I was prepared for. I knew things would be lean in the beginning, but meeting the challenge of maintaining a consistent workflow, however, that was especially important to me. That was my special challenge, because I tend to be quite Newtonian, meaning that as an object in motion, I tend to remain in motion. But as an object at rest, I tend to remain at rest. So having paying work every day, from the day one, no matter how much or for how little, at least in the beginning, I knew that that was absolutely essential in order for me to be successful. Avoiding that feast and famine cycle so often associated with a growing freelance consultancy was imperative, because I knew that for me, famine, if allowed to manifest, could easily linger. The strategies that I'm going to share with you this afternoon are born of that particular imperative. They've helped me increase the consistency of my workflow and make freelancing the exceptionally enjoyable and rewarding undertaking that it can be. I will admit, there is certainly an element of your mileage may vary. One size definitely does not fit all in this business. But I think when taken holistically as a body of advice, they can help you as well. Let's get started, shall we? The very best single bit of advice that I received as a budding freelancer was that a freelance portfolio should be managed very similarly to a financial portfolio. Diversify, diversify, diversify. Now, I repeat that 3 times, not just for emphasis, but to indicate that there are actually 3 types of diversification which can make your portfolio resistant to prolonged slumping. That's diversification of type, diversification of source, and diversification of time. Diversification of type means that while your business is software development, it's advantageous to supplement project work with various other services. Now, I am not suggesting web hosting or selling domain names or any of the other myriad ancillary services which many freelance developers have offered in the hopes of building a tower of small stones. No. I am, however, suggesting that limiting yourself to project work only is limiting. Ongoing consultancy relationships, retainer agreements, maintenance roles on existing projects are the perfect complement to project work, serving to provide some level of consistency to what could otherwise be a very volatile freelance work, volatile, that's the word, right? Volatile freelance workflow. Now, as important as diversification of type to the health of your freelance portfolio is diversification of source. That means that regarding your primary line of business, and that's typically project development, be very, very careful about limiting yourself to a single client. If you're fully engaged with a single project, when that project ends, unless you've managed to schedule another project to start immediately following, you're going to have a period without work. Those periods are lost. They're absolutely unrecoverable. They represent lost opportunities and lost income, which cannot be replaced. I work to insure myself against these losses by always working more than one project at a time. One project is usually my primary engagement, but it's seldom my only engagement. I found that a 60-30 split of my time, now those of you that do math, the remaining 10% for various other services, customer service for previous clients, etc., I found that that's a very manageable balance for me. Only for the absolute most trusted clients with whom I already have an established relationship would I ever even consider devoting 100% of my bandwidth. And even with those clients, be mindful that any period of full engagement often means a period of zero engagement immediately following, and price yourself accordingly. If this is a 6-month contract, but it's typically taking you early on a month or two to replace that 6-month contract, you price that like an 8-month contract, or you're going to end up working a 10-month year. Similarly, I would be very careful about too closely aligning my business with that of a single client. It might be alluring to become the de facto in-house development team for a larger client, but I'd be very wary of doing so. You have dramatically expanded your risk to really very little advantage. By aligning so closely to a single client, you've pinned the success of your business to the success of theirs. That means that if they have a slump, you have a slump. And remember too that not all relationships last forever. Despite our best intentions and greatest efforts, occasionally a client relationship ends prematurely for one reason or another. If they decide to, quote, go in a different direction, suddenly you would also be going in a different direction. If they're your only client and have been your only client for any period of time, you're essentially starting over. And let's face it, beginnings are tremendously difficult. I do everything in my power to avoid suffering them repeatedly. The third type of diversification necessary for a slump-resistant freelance portfolio is diversification of time. If you're working multiple projects simultaneously, the only way that a potential famine period can even begin is if you allow those projects to end simultaneously as well. I've also found that describing the project that you're currently working on is, for some reason, inexplicably more compelling to a potential client than describing projects that you recently completed. That means it's in your best interest to stagger your projects, so you're never completely without work. Not only because dormant periods are to be avoided at absolutely all costs, but because it's simply good for business. Realize that this is very much within your control. Yeah, projects have timelines, they have deadlines, those aren't always yours to determine. You do, however, have much more influence than you think, and successful freelancers use it. Good clients, the kind of clients you want to build a business on, respect a professional's availability. Limiting your availability such that you're never completely without work because you never have multiple projects ending at exactly the same time It's an important strategy to help you even out the peaks and valleys of a freelance workflow. Be smart about when your projects end, even if they aren't scheduled to end at the same time. Freelance opportunities are notoriously scarce at year's end. A project which spans the winter holidays and gives you work into January is more valuable to you than a similar project which ends the first week of December. Because in both cases, you're likely not to be able to begin another project until mid to late January. Keep that in mind when you're evaluating opportunities. If your consultancy operates in an industry niche and there are seasonal periods in that industry where freelance opportunities are in lesser abundance, it's in your interest to cultivate projects which span those periods. Keep that in mind when determining project schedules and evaluating product opportunities. Another fantastic strategy which I've employed successfully to maintain a consistent workflow is to hire a marketing department. Really? Hire a marketing department? I am just trying to, meet my overhead at this point. I'm just starting out. How can I possibly afford a marketing department? And my advice, my response to that is, yeah, you should actually hire several. Hire more than one. A marketing department is what I call those who would prospect for new opportunities on your behalf. Agencies and small development shops. You see, agencies and small development shops, they're subject to that same client ebb and flow, just like you are as a freelancer. And one strategy which many employ to avoid having staff developers sitting dormant during periods of little engagement is to slightly understaff and to bring in outside development talent to expand the team on a project-by-project basis. Contract development. It's a source of potential business which many freelance developers overlook. Now granted, you're not going to be able to bill the contracting organization your normal client rate. But that should not dissuade you from cultivating those sorts of relationships. 100% engagement at 70% rate beats 50% engagement at 100% rate every single time. It's just a math problem. Now, you're not required to accept every contract that you're offered. So if you have steady client work, the lower rate for contract development, that's not going to be an issue for you. You're not going to consider that. But when you don't have steady workflow, however, the comfort of being fully engaged for even 3-6 months at a time or more is well worth that rate differential. Think of it. If you've cultivated relationships with several agencies or development shops, while you're working on one project, they are out beating the streets, actively seeking your next project. Yeah, they're out there looking for your next engagement while you're working this one. And that's why I call them marketing departments. In many ways, I view the relationship that I don't work for them. They work for me by prospecting for new business while I'm still fully engaged. I mean, they're just an absolutely incredible force multiplier. The more of those relationships to cultivate, the better off you are. Yeah?
Do you have any suggestions for finding a good marketing department? Just go over
Start here, and I'm going to cover that in a minute about developer relationships. And we're going to circle back. I time this typically about 32, 33 minutes so that we can have, this is a very personal topic and everybody's got a lot of questions, and I'll carry questions out into the hall too. But the short answer is conferences are my number one source of making those types of engagements. There are people here who are individual freelancers or potential individual freelancers. There are people here who are large corporations hiring, but there are also representatives of smaller development shops that are here learning, here making business deals themselves, etc. You make those relationships over lunch, in the hallway track, in the pub tonight, wherever, and you'd be surprised. When I started conferencing hard, the next year was nearly double, and it was from people that I had met at conferences. Yeah, user groups too. You can't be involved in too many. Obviously, you go once and you see. You can spot them, the ones that have, that attract a more businessy clientele, those who are generating business and engaging end clients and may have a potential, may be a potential source of new leads for you. But yeah, networking, and it can start at 2:45. Now, in addition to being an ongoing source of business, contract development, it abstracts away the entire client relationship, which for many, myself included, is a welcome respite. Many freelance developers find that they enjoy the consistency of contract development so much that they limit their consultancies to contract work exclusively. Freelance designers and front-end developers. Now, I'm primarily a server-side developer in the, I took my tag off, in the PHP community. So for me, front-end developers are a similar force multiplier. A solid relationship with several other freelance professionals who are actively pursuing new clients and new projects, which then they can share with you and bring you in on, is a formidable asset. I found that for whatever reason, designers and front-end developers especially, at least early in people's freelance careers, they have an easier time than server-side developers marketing themselves directly to clients. There's just something about a portfolio of projects which the client can visually appreciate, which is tremendously persuasive. So early on, they have a much easier time. And wouldn't it be great if you were able then to market yourself similarly? And you can by forming those relationships with the designers and front-end developers who are already successfully marketing themselves. Their portfolios, they become your portfolios. Their projects, those become your projects. A similar source of business for the freelance developer, many people find surprising, and that is other freelance developers. Yeah, your competitors, and I totally don't look at it that way, but your competitors, they have business, and more frequently than you might imagine, they are willing to share that business with you. Freelance developers will occasionally find themselves with a project which requires additional resources. Who do they call? You want to position yourself and make those relationships such that they call you. Occasionally, freelance developers need to even move on from a project for one reason or another, and they have to find a good home for a quality project. And you want to be the person that they call. I work right now on a project that another developer, he used to get paid for sitting in on meetings and simply staying abreast of the project because the end client, the agency's client, was concerned about the bus factor working with a one-person consultancy. Now, he had to move on. He accepted a developer evangelism role and was unable to even sit in on those meetings. He reached out to me. Is this something you'd be interested in doing? I said, hey, I can sit in on a corporate meeting and answer my emails and just keep one ear peeled to the conference call at full rate, as easy as the next guy. And since then, I've billed about 1,200 hours, turned into real project work over time. And those opportunities, they're not uncommon. And if you aren't actively seeking them, they're going to go to somebody else. They're not going to sit unfulfilled. So you need to recognize that freelance developers are not competitors at all, not in any way, shape, or form. There is an abundance of work in our industry. There is more than enough work to go around. You need to keep, your perspective on them should be as invaluable assets, really. Work together, cultivate reciprocal relationships, just work at being a really good community member. That's an important one. Be active in your local user group, go to conferences, be active online, mentor a junior developer, these things that buy you an incredible amount of goodwill within the community. And you'd be surprised when people need help on a project, your name is the first one that comes up. Those type of activities, you'll find that they open another plentiful source of work for your freelance business. Now, one mistake that many freelance developers make, which often leads to extended periods of inactivity, is to limit their active prospecting efforts to when they no longer have work. That's a serious mistake, because every slump begins with one day of inactivity. Think about it. If you never have 1 day of inactivity, you can never have a slump. So to prevent that period of inactivity between engagements, you should begin intensifying your prospecting efforts when your current project reaches about 80% completion. And yeah, that means that just when the project reaches its greatest intensity, you somehow need to find time every day to actively prospect for new business. But he said this was easy. But the truth is that even toward the end of projects, there's a lot of time where you're going to be blocked by the client or perhaps deliverables that you're waiting on from another developer, and it'll give you time within your schedule for prospecting. Seldom have I found myself having to seriously extend my workday to shoot off a couple of prospecting emails or attend a conference. What happens though if your prospecting efforts are successful before your current project is completed? Fair question. I mean, it's not a problem. That's exactly what you're looking for. Good clients, and this is the main takeaway, good clients, the type of clients that you're looking to build your consultancy upon, they will wait for good developers. If they can't wait, to me, that is a client smell, and I want to stay far away typically. Those that assumed you were just sitting around waiting for their call and can start tomorrow, they're just likely not the type of clients you're looking for, and they're opportunities that you should be passing on in any event. And that doesn't mean when you're 4 years in and you can afford, quote unquote, to turn clients down. No, you can't afford not to turn bad clients down even from day one. Yeah, many freelance consultancies, they don't get off the ground because the first couple of clients were just endless holes into which the freelancer poured time, and when they evaluated things after 3 months and they realized that they had a month and a half's worth of pay, they decided it wasn't for them and started looking for real work. You just can't. You can't accept clients who are going to be such a drain like that. And one of the smells is that it had to be done yesterday. Oh my gosh, I need somebody right now. Good clients plan. Good clients understand that good developers aren't always available instantly, and they plan for those contingencies, and they should be willing to wait for you within reason. It's important to be planting seeds for future success at all times. Now that means you needn't be actively prospecting, sending out emails, etc. when you're fully engaged, but you need to be keeping your ear to the ground and pushing your brand at all times. When you become aware of opportunities, be certain that your name is a part of the conversation. Yeah, you'd be surprised just how frequently that an opportunity which presented itself at an inopportune time will present itself again later. If you've already established a solid reputation, it's not inconceivable that the project will wait until you have availability. But even early in your freelance career, opportunities often represent themselves. It's a sad reality in our industry that not every freelancer is as qualified and conscientious as you or I. So the possibility that you could be brought in to a project after another freelance developer had been engaged is very real. Neither of those things can happen, though, if you're not passively prospecting at all times and speaking up whenever opportunities present themselves. Yeah, I don't have bandwidth necessarily for that right now, but if down the road, here's my card, keep my name in mind, etc. And quite often that turns into work pre-scheduled for months down the road. It's also important as pushing brand continuously and ratcheting up your prospecting efforts before your current engagement is ended, is to be careful not to reject opportunities prematurely. I once received an email regarding an opportunity, which the subject line was composed of a single word: job. Granted, it was at the end of my current project, or it was close, and I was in full-on prospecting mode. But at that point, I had been freelancing for a few years, And at that time, the absolute last thing that I wanted was anything that one would fairly describe as a job. But my grandmother instilled in me from an early age the idea that every personal inquiry deserves a response. Now, it's still an open question whether inquiries from recruiters that confuse Java and JavaScript qualify as personal, but you'll decide that question on your own. But I sent a relatively pre-composed reply to that email inquiry. As it turned out, the email was from a developer on the project, and he'd been tasked with assisting in the recruiting efforts. And someone had passed along my name, and he had shot out this email. And it was obvious from his subsequent email that I wasn't a fit for the role that they were envisioning. It was also obvious that he was not a fit for the role of recruiter. But that email revealed that they were considering engaging a consultant to guide them through an upcoming legacy intervention. A few emails about a week later, I found myself across the desk from the decision maker. And before the current project had ended, I had my next gig. That job ultimately became a six-figure consulting engagement over the next year. And my sole responsibility was to make certain that the developer role in that company could never, ever again be confused with a job. Now, that's certainly an exceptional case, but the lesson is widely applicable. Know what it is that you're saying no to, and don't dismiss opportunities out of pocket. My grandmother would tell you that the real lesson is that behind every email is a person, and they deserve a reply in kind. And by the way, that's a pretty good lesson too. Another way to lay a foundation for future success is to keep going back to the well. Revisit your prior successes. Actively solicit referrals and repeat business. There is simply no better source of future business than past business, than a satisfied client. The Freelancers Union did a survey, and they asked self-identified successful freelancers to report what percentage of their work came from referral and repeat business. Self-identified successful freelancers, and we all tend to underestimate our own success when reporting these things, said that 61% of their business was via referral on average. So strive to build relationships which outlive the project, and you'll find that your phone will ring more frequently. Now, what happens if you find yourself, though, in a slump? So in addition to intensifying your prospecting efforts, one of the best slump busters is that. Check back in with your prior clients. Many clients, they have a backlog of what I call someday projects. Occasionally things which they were de-scoped maybe even as part of your last project together, and you know that got left on the table as part of the last project. And if prompted, maybe even enticed with a slight discount, they would be happy to initiate. I mean, slight discount's probably a strategy I would only use earlier in my career rather than later, but the point is that it works. These are things which were de-scoped, deprioritized, etc., but the business senses a value and an opportunity. Quite often, they'll reach out and grab it. And you need to lay the groundwork for those opportunities early on. Ferret out those projects while you're working with a client. You're working on one project, get to know their business. You're going to develop better software for them anyway on this project, and you're going to uncover other opportunities so that when you're calling back at a later date, you can point to a specific project which was on their radar, on their horizon previously, which now they might consider moving forward on. And it's perhaps worthwhile to even mention the possibility of these rainy day discounts in advance. Let them know that you understand that a particular project or a portion of this project that got de-scoped, it's not on their front burner right now, but that occasionally you do find yourself unengaged, and your strategy is to contact former clients to clean up some of those neglected projects at a discount. Remember, the people you're doing work for, they're business people too. They understand this, and they appreciate this, and they'll help you out that way. Another excellent source of potential work that you can fall back on during lean times are the freelance marketplaces like Elance or Odesk. I personally find them to be a relatively poor business model, but as a source of quick fill-in work, they can be invaluable, slump busters. But know, however, that it does take some time to get an established reputation in those marketplaces. So that's a resource you need to invest in early on in your career, either by taking on a few minor projects at less than your normal rate. That's just the way those things work. Consider it a marketing expense. I mean, how much do you get paid for prospecting? You know, a lot of people early in their careers make the mistake that, well, this is my rate and I'll never work for anything less than my rate, and that pride kills their business. Establish your reputation early, even if it costs you a little. Consider it a marketing expense, and you've paved the way for future success. Other choice is use those marketplaces to administer projects that you generate outside the marketplace. You'll pay a percentage on them, absolutely, but you'll have feedback and a history of being paid by an established client at that higher rate, and that lays the groundwork then to be hired in the future at that rate from the vast, vast pool of business that exists in these freelance marketplaces.
So,
Yeah.
Come lost me on that.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, like, if you have a client outside
You engage me, and I'm early in the career, and this is it's a 2-month gig. And I think to myself, you know what, that company, they've got a pretty good name, and 2 months I can afford to lose 7%. Let me put some money away for the future. And I'll suggest to you, hey, I typically like to be paid through Odesk Freelance. It gives you X and Y and Z security that you only pay up on my deliverables. And for me, it helps me build a reputation, et cetera. Can we do our business through there? So I've brought business into the marketplace. Yeah, it's going to cost me X% right off the top. I have to pay for that privilege of administrating it through that marketplace. But that's an investment, because now I've got a 2-month project that a member of the business community has vouched that I did a great job on, and I got paid X dollars an hour, a real rate, not the bottom of the barrel rates that seem to be so prevalent in these markets. And so it's going to be easier for you to get that rate then again in the future. And don't think that that good rates don't exist. I've got an occasional client now that actually was passed from another developer, interestingly. And I asked that developer, the guy's name's Tim Littell. He gives a talk on being a freelance mercenary. He only ever worked through Odesk, and I found that like the strangest thing in the world. But you see him at conferences. It's a great talk. See it online. I think Confessions of a Freelance Mercenary, Tim Littell. And I said, Tim, how do you do it? And well, for him, he just wanted, why do you do it? For him, he wanted nothing to do with accounting. He wanted nothing to do with keeping hours. He wanted nothing to do with anything other than coding. And so he didn't mind. Odesk took a snapshot of him every 30 seconds or whatever it was working. It sent the invoices, kept track of his time. He got paid out of escrow, and it abstracted away all the business stuff. He didn't want to work for anybody else, but he didn't want to be in business either. So that's what he used it for. But this client was paying top rate. I mean, absolutely top rate. At the time that he passed it off to me, it was the most I had ever charged per hour for a client ever. And he got this client through Odesk. I said, how in the world did that happen? And he said, well, ask Jeffrey, the client. I said, okay, Jeff. I said, how'd you end up with Tim? You usually don't find developers as qualified as Tim in places like Odesk. That's typically a race to the bottom. And he said, oh, well, it had a telephony component I knew. So I searched on Twilio, and that narrowed it down. And then I reversed the sort so that the most expensive people were on top. And I reached out to the top 3. He wanted somebody good. So clients like that exist even in those marketplaces. But you have to be one of the top 3. So establishing yourself in those marketplaces early it's absolutely imperative if you want to go back to that well at a later date. It's not without cost, that play. But if you make the investment early in your career, when your rates are anyway lower, it's going to cost far less than any prolonged slump that you might encounter later. Now, like I said at the beginning, even when taken together, these strategies are no guarantee that your freelance workflow will be perfectly consistent, nor that you'll never suffer a prolonged slump. Their efficacy, however, is battle-tested. These are the strategies that I personally used in building my freelance consultancy, and that's allowed me to avoid suffering a single day without paid work since 4 years ago, this past January 9th. Never missed a day. A day that I wanted to work, somebody was always willing to pay me to work, and it was these strategies I shared with you today. They're not one size fit all. Some of them might not be appropriate for your niche or for your business's maturity, but they definitely are one size fits many. and adopting even a single strategy will increase the consistency of your workflow, and it'll reduce the unnecessary stress, which, you know, it all too often gets in the way of our enjoyment of really what's a pretty fantastic lifestyle afforded a freelance software developer. You know, I'm in a beautiful area, you know, on a little vacation here, and I'm still able to work. It's really a great lifestyle. Take a look at the specific advices. Take a serious look, those I shared with you this afternoon, and tailor them to fit your niche and your maturity of your consultancy. And I'm confident that you can join me in getting off the freelance roller coaster. Rate the talk and joined in 13969. If you're curious about my travels talking all over the world this year, that's wisdomworldtour.com. You can find me online at Code Rabbi. And at least in this room, we've got about 7 minutes for questions and conversation.
Any tips or advice for people who want to join the freelance world, but in a remote environment, remote aspect, as opposed to having to be, you know, business facing?
Yeah, sure. So contract development is probably the easiest way there, and networking with these small dev shops. Most of them are virtual, so when they ebb and flow, they're looking for people that they met at conferences, people that they engage with on IRC, you know, and Twitter, etc. And those are almost exclusively remote. You know, you identify remote dev shops, make their acquaintance, and when they need work and reach out to you, that's going to be a remote role. End client work is much more difficult to find remote, especially early on as a freelancer. The types of clients that are going to consider you early on, unless you come from a tremendous background as an inside guy, are probably those a little less trusting, a little bit more old school, and want to see you face to face. I don't quote project work. I quote an hourly rate. This is my time. You run your business well and use my time well, great. And if you don't, that's not my problem. But project rate does tend to melt away some of that distrust and makes it easier to do exclusively remote work for end clients as well. But I think B2B with consultancies is probably the best angle for that, to break in as a fully remote freelancer. Yeah.
So you mentioned that 60-40 percentage.
Yeah.
So if it is not remote, how do you manage 60-40 percentage?
So these days I am strictly remote. I mean, I will do, when I consult, you know, I said I code, I consult, and I coach. And so when I consult, I will go on site. But coding, I work best on 3 screens in my pajamas in my home. You know, not in front of this. I'm an old man. I can't do a laptop on the road as well. I do a lot of it now that I travel some. But so yeah, that I do exclusively at home. But even freelance client-facing work, you've got a lot of face time with the client, but you don't code in their office typically. You know, you're going there and you're doing requirements gathering. You're giving updates. You're event storming. Whatever it happens to be, depending on what phase of the project you're in. So you schedule and plan that time around your other client. And again, good clients, the clients you want to base your business on, understand that sometimes you have an appointment with another client. And those that they want all of your time, they just don't feel comfortable with that. To me, that's a smell that there's going to be something else that they don't feel comfortable with that affects me a little bit more, and I'm not interested. Yeah. I saw a hand over here, but let me hit you again, and then we'll go back. Yeah.
Okay. So you said you divide your time 60-30 and then 10.
10,
right?
yeah.
So.
And I mean, that's obviously soft numbers, but yeah.
With clients that like to have more of a full-time contract developer who is able to put in close to 40 hours a week, how do you manage that? Or do you just put in the extra time, or do you just say, I only have this many hours a week available?
I only have those many hours available. I have a plan, I work my plan. So with the dev shops and contract developer roles, that means some opportunities are closed to me. They are advertising for full-time only. And sometimes, depending, if I've got a really good in with them and I need a new primary, I'll pitch a 25-hour-a-week relationship and explain to them why that's in their best interest as well. It works sometimes it doesn't. Obviously, after you have a track record, that's going to be an easier sell. But closing the door to those opportunities, to me, prevents the possibility that I'm ever going to be slumping. This system works for me, and again, it wasn't to get all the business, it wasn't to get even more business. These strategies were so that I would have my butt in the seat every day and work my plan and grow my business, because I knew, being Newtonian, that if I ever became an object at rest, forget about it. So it could be that I left money in the street early on by not taking or by closing the door prematurely to full-time opportunities, but staggering my work like this kept me busy every day. And for me personally, because of my own disposition, I think it was the best choice.
What language and skills are in demand?
So I come from the PHP world, and PHP is all night long. There's just more work out there than people know what to do with. Both new project work and existing. If a person wanted and could stomach legacy intervention, there is a world of legacy intervention for enterprise projects written in PHP out there. And unfortunately for our industry, there's more being written every day. That's good for freelance developers though. JavaScript, it's the same thing. JavaScript is the new hotness because you can use it up and down the stack. Pretty much just follow the trends. Your more enterprisey languages, you're going to have a much more difficult time breaking into as a freelance developer, obviously, because more credible clients demand more credible freelancers. So day one, I don't know if I would ever feel comfortable leaping out there as a Erlang consultant. That would scare me. I don't think there's much traction in that early on. As you grow, and 5 years in, you're dealing with larger enterprises, and you want to begin offering additional languages or consider opportunities which exist in other languages, then that's great. If you're dealing with end clients, or if you're dealing with polyglot dev shops, so it doesn't matter. The language that's going to work, for you and growing your business is the one you know best. So, I'd stay away from the more enterprisey things starting out, I think.
Related
We'll follow up.
You work with databases a lot, or?
I do. I'm not full stack. Early on, I kind of had to be because it seemed that the day one, the type of projects that I was getting were looking for a sole freelancer and to quote a project rate, etc. So I was full stack. I was everything from the front end to the back. I mean, I was Twitter Bootstrap was my best friend when it came out. I'm not a front end dev, but I had to be. The move in server side for freelance obviously parallels that in the workplace, that we're expected to wear more hats now, or more DevOps. These roles are becoming synthesized into this is what a developer does. He's not just a PHP developer. He's also busy with the database. He's busy with queues. He's busy with caching. These other ancillary services. So that's part of it. But again, that's if you're end client and smaller clients. If you are engaging as a contract developer, depending on the size of the development shop and the size of clients they're getting, there are a lot of projects I get where I come in exclusively for an architectural consult on PHP in a particular framework even. You can really carve out your niche by networking with dev shops. Lower rate, but more business, more specialization.
Not quite sure how to phrase this.
Okay.
I'll just give it a shot.
The only way you can do it.
So in terms of, every developer has some breadth, shallow breadth, but then their real strength is deep in one area, maybe more than one area. So when you're consulting, when you're talking with new clients and getting involved with them, how do you approach those areas where you start to drift off? Like there's jargon and stuff, and how do you like present yourself credibly when you suddenly find yourself not really being strong in an area?
So I'm wondering, is this something you experienced, or is this something you're fearful of? The reason I make that distinction is I've never experienced that. I make a never experienced that strong, but it's seldom where I'm talking, this is a nice follow-up to my previous answer as well, I think. It's seldom where I'm speaking to the end client. And again, now I do more consulting than end client work, more contract dev than end client work. But even early on, when I was speaking with the end client, they didn't care whether it was, back then it was ZF1 or Symfony or rolling my own, and they didn't care if it was MySQL or Postgres or anything else. If I'm talking that nitty-gritty with the end client, I'm concerned. I'm the subject matter expert there, and they're the domain expert. And maintaining those roles is usually a sign it's going to be a good relationship. If the guy writing the check is too busy with buzzword bingo, it's probably, to me, that's a bit of a client smell.
So you're talking about, you're basically getting at that your prospecting is pretty much dealing with people technical people.
These days,
okay.
yeah. But again, early on, prospecting with end clients, let's pick a website. Pick a type of an end client. A business that you might be familiar with. He knows that business. He or she knows that business. They know software development. Really, I worked recently with an end client, a large company, in the Medicaid onboarding space. I knew nothing about Medicaid onboarding. They knew nothing about PHP. So I didn't argue with them on the business rules, and there was an expectation that they didn't argue with me or place constraints on the implementation either. The minute those boundaries start getting crossed, that's a smell, and you have to kind of weigh in your own mind, can I afford to take this client now or not? Sometimes the answer is yes, and you have to, but if they go too far afield and they're really dictating your stack, unless you're dealing with a large company and this is their inside technical person, that makes me nervous. And if you're dealing with a large company, it's their inside technical person, and they're taking you far afield from your core competencies, ask to bring in somebody else as a subject matter expert. Grow your network, reach out to other developers for a consult on those things. The larger clients will appreciate that and they'll pay for it. They want expertise across the board. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
So something that a lot of devs and people everywhere do is the idea of fake it till you make it. Basically, when you're unfamiliar about a subject, you can just dive in and learn it as you go. How do you recommend handling billable hours for those times where you might be, while building the project, still learning a little bit more about it to be more effective? Because obviously your clients are going to expect you to be confident in it.
Yeah.
And if you take a job that maybe you're 50% confident in, do you provide a 50% rate? Like, do you say for every 2 hours I bill you 1?
Right. So early on, Code Rabbi, are you asking the coder or the rabbi? Because that's really a rabbi question. It's an integrity question. And early on, when there were projects like that where I didn't, thought was a stretch for me, I did quote project rates rather. And I was quoting the project rate mentally off 40 hours, knowing it might take me 60 to complete the job, and that was on my back. It's an integrity thing. It's also, I had hair before I started. It's, quoting 40 to working 60 to bill 40. It's, you age, you age. Now that said, you don't have to be an absolute, the expert in the room on a particular technology in order to bill for it. Freelance is no different than inside work. If inside they would place this on the dev's desk and say, hey, this is yours, and they would not hire someone outside who is an expert, that's kind of your litmus test. And you can bill them then full rate, and to me, as the rabbi speaking, be perfectly comfortable doing so. If it's something where, hey, I always wanted to learn Node and a Node project fell in my lap, no, do that on a project rate. You can't do that on their dime. You're either going to kill yourself for doing it, or they're gonna sense it, and it's just not good for you or your business.
So learn about it first, get some confidence.
Get your feet wet. Yeah. Get your feet wet on your side projects, or quote a project rate and be honest with them. Yeah. Yep. One more, then we'll get out for the next speaker. Yep.
How wide geographically do you have to cast your net? Do you have to travel to these different geographic areas?
So I'm remote almost exclusively. Consulting, if they'll fly me in, I'll come see them. I can fly anywhere. That doesn't bother me at all. But if you're working end clients, near to you is better, not only because you don't travel, but the face-to-face is something that you offer that the next guy doesn't. Remote's great for developers, and the more companies that are going remote and being open to remote, I think that's fantastic for all of us, because I've watched friends of mine, I live about an hour and a half out of New York City, and I've watched friends of mine commute into New York City every day for years and get old before my very eyes, literally. Commute is killer, but nothing beats the face-to-face. We don't yet have a remote technology as good as shaking somebody's hand and sitting down over a coffee and hacking it out. There's no collaboration software as good as Post-it notes on a whiteboard. So relatively local to you is an advantage if that's the type of work you like to do. Personally, I find being in the office somewhat stressful, and I can do it short periods of time, so coming in for a 2 to 3 day consult fits my personality. An end client work where I'm going to be in the office 3 days a week for 6 months it scares me to death. So, okay. Thank you very much. I'm around. I'm available outside immediately if you have other questions. Feel free. Thank you very much.